Before the sun could rise, Peter Obi's phone vibrated like a silent alarm. His youngest brother's voice trembled, not from the cold, but from something deeper, something darker. "They've come, brother. No warning, no paper, just bulldozers and guns." Peter shot upright, no time to think, no time to brush his teeth. He caught the first flight back to Lagos, a city he once called home. Now it was rubble, a building, 15 years of work, flattened. No one answered questions. No one met his eyes, only dust, and silence that stung like betrayal. But that night, when it seemed the silence had swallowed all hope, another voice called, "Brother Peter, this is Ibrahim Traoré. You are not alone, and this fire they don't know, it spreads." Peter looked up at the gray sky, not to cry, but to remind himself, if this can happen to me, who is safe in Nigeria? Peter stood at the edge of the rubble, his brother's business gone, crushed like it never mattered. He walked up to the men guarding the site. "This demolition, show me the court order." One of them, barely 25, pulled out a folded paper. Peter took it. He read it once, twice. Then his hands began to shake, not from fear, but disbelief. The court order was addressed to unknown persons. "Unknown," Peter whispered. "How do you sue ghosts?" No company name, no address, no warning, just vague words about illegal squatters. But this building had been standing for over 15 years, registered, legal, every permit, every tax filed, a proper business built with patience, not privilege. Peter turned back to the crowd. They watched him quietly. Vendors, mechanics, children, eyes wide, but mouths sealed. They had seen what happened, but no one would speak, not here, not now. Fear had done its job. Across the street, someone held up a phone to film. A plainclothes officer appeared from nowhere, nodded, and the phone disappeared into a pocket. People understood. In Lagos, silence isn't emptiness, it's protection. Peter clenched his jaw. "They want us to be afraid," he muttered, "but fear, it only delays the truth." At a nearby law office in Lagos, Peter met with two legal experts. The documents were spread across the table, ink still fresh, but already soaked in rot. Mrs. Ease, a senior advocate, read the demolition order slowly. Her brow tightened with every line. "This doesn't make legal sense," she said. "This entire case shouldn't even exist." The petition was filed by a group with no real name, no address, no official registration, a ghost company. Another lawyer leaned in. Filed on Thursday. Judgment given Friday afternoon. Demolition started Saturday morning. 48 hours, no hearing, no defense, no notice to the real owner. "That's impossible," Peter said. "In Nigeria, land cases take years." Mrs. Ease nodded grimly. "Unless someone powerful wants it gone." Peter's voice dropped. "Who signed the judgment?" The younger lawyer answered, "An acting judge, with links to high offices." Peter sat back, eyes cold, breathing slow. The truth wasn't hiding. It was sitting in plain sight, bold, shameless, smiling. "This isn't corruption," he said quietly. "It's sabotage." Outside, Lagos carried on. Cars honked. Children ran through puddles. Traders bargained over plantains. But something had shifted. A line had been crossed. Because this wasn't just about one man's property. It was a test, a warning. If they could erase Peter Obi's business, what chance did the tomato seller have? The mechanic, the teacher on strike. Not a single media house ran the story. No major paper, no government spokesperson, only silence, loud, calculated, dangerous. Somewhere in Abuja, someone was watching, checking his reactions, tracking the headlines that never came, measuring his silence, because they thought Obi would be loud, would cause a scene. But Peter was still, and stillness when filled with truth can terrify. He picked up his phone. No missed calls, no apology, no explanation, just dust in the wind and questions that screamed, There were no sirens, no press conference, no televised outrage, only rubble and silence. And in that silence, fear multiplied. Peter Obi stood by the yellow police tape, his brother beside him, fists clenched, lips tight. A woman across the street selling fruit shook her head. They didn't even give them time, she whispered. Just came, like thieves in the night. Around her no one replied, but no one disagreed, because they all felt it, the weight of being watched, the cost of speaking out. Peter walked to a nearby shop. Do you know who they are? The shopkeeper looked at him, then at the guards, then at the unmarked black trucks by the gate. He leaned closer. These are Tinubu's boys, he whispered. We've seen them before when they want to scare people. Peter took a breath. Can I record this? The man stepped back immediately. Oga, not here, not now. Just then, someone across the road held up a phone. A plainclothes officer stepped forward. Nodded once. The phone vanished. So did the courage. Eyes turned away. Heads bowed. The street fell quiet again. Not because no one cared, but because everyone was afraid. That night, Peter sat in a dim room, his clothes still dusty, his thoughts loud. Is this what we've become, he thought? A nation where bulldozers speak louder than justice, where truth is whispered in back alleys, where courage dies behind closed curtains, and yet not all curtains stayed closed. Far away in a quiet corner of Lagos, two young men, Obi's former campaign aides, began to ask questions, not because they were journalists, not because they were police, but because truth was burning in their hearts. They traced a name faintly scratched onto one of the bulldozers, a logistics firm, unregistered, no website. The number switched off. The address, an abandoned building, broken windows, no staff. Still they waited. Hours passed. Then, a man returned to collect tools, an excavator driver. They followed him, quietly, carefully, to a roadside bar. He ordered a drink, sat alone. They approached. Please, one of them said gently, we're not here to arrest you. We just want to know who sent you. The driver looked around, then down. I was paid in cash, he muttered. No name, just a location. Who told you? He hesitated, then leaned in. A man in a black Jeep. He said it was political, that's all. The two young men exchanged glances. Did he mention Tinubu? No answer, just silence. But silence, when full of truth, is louder than any confession. Peter later met them in a car park. No office, no cameras, just stories, clues, gaps between lies. And one undeniable fact: someone had used the system law court's machinery to erase what they feared. Peter held up the fake demolition notice. Unknown persons. That's what it said. He shook his head. They want to erase us with lies, but I'm still here, and so is the truth. But he also knew not everyone can afford to fight back. He was a former governor, a presidential candidate. He had lawyers, supporters, connections. But what about the woman selling plantains? The boy hawking phone cards on the street? The teacher paid in crumbs? If this could happen to him, what about them? So let me ask you, if this happened in your country to your family, would you speak up or stay quiet to survive? And if you were the mother, watching your children's future crushed by bulldozers, would you forgive or would you fight? Obi's voice in a later interview was calm but heavy. This wasn't just about my brother's company, he said. It was about fear and what people will do when fear controls the system. In Nigeria, they say silence protects you, but it also protects your oppressor. And now that silence had grown so thick, it was choking the truth. Yet somewhere, beneath the dust and the dread, a fire was beginning to spark, because truth once known refuses to stay buried. And so the question remains, what happens next? Will this story fade like so many others, buried under new scandals and old apathy? Or will it become something more, a symbol, a turning point, a memory too loud to ignore, because when silence breaks, change begins. It was late. The sky above Lagos had turned the color of rust. The air still smelled of dust concrete, and something bitterer. Peter Obi sat alone. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something told him this one mattered. He answered. "Brother Peter." The voice was steady, deep, familiar. "This is Ibrahim Traoré, from Ouagadougou." Peter sat straighter. "President Traoré." "I heard what happened," the Burkina leader continued, "and I want you to know you are not alone." There was a pause, a silence that felt like a breath between brothers. Two men, two nations, one storm. "They think demolishing a building will silence your voice, but it will only amplify it," Traoré said. "I have seen this before. When they can't buy your silence, they try to bury your soul." Peter closed his eyes. "It wasn't even my property," he replied. "It was my brother's, a legal business. 15 years. Now, nothing. And they fear you for that very reason," Traoré answered. "Because you represent something they cannot control. Because your existence threatens their illusion of power." Peter didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Traoré continued. "Do not back down. Africa is watching. We are watching. The world may turn away," he added, "but history doesn't forget." Peter nodded slowly, even though the other man couldn't see it. "Thank you, Ibrahim," he said quietly. "Thank you for standing." "If the fire grows too hot," Traoré said, "some of us are ready to help carry the flame." The call ended, but it lit something in Peter's chest, because for the first time that week, he didn't feel alone. A few days later, a discreet invitation arrived, from Ouagadougou, a closed-door forum, no cameras, no headlines, just leaders, real ones, young, uncompromising, burnt by betrayal, but still standing. The topic, African sovereignty and the silent war against voices of change. Peter packed no entourage, told no press. He traveled quiet. Because sometimes revolutions whisper before they roar. Inside the modest state house in Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré greeted him with a firm handshake. Others were already in the room, from Mali, from Niger, from Guinea, from across the continent. Each man bore scars. Each woman carried fire in her eyes. They all had stories. A village abandoned after French soldiers withdrew. A dam project blocked by World Bank concerns. A journalist exiled for exposing foreign mining contracts. But beneath it all, a common enemy silence, injustice. The systems that dressed up old colonialism in new suits. Traoré stood first. "They tried to silence you, Peter, but they didn't realize when one of us is struck, the fire spreads." He looked around the room. "We are not just here to console each other. We are here to design our defense, not with bullets, but with truth, with unity, with vision." Peter stood. He didn't speak like a politician, not like a candidate. He spoke like a son of the soil, bruised, but not broken. They came in the night, no name, no reason. They crushed a company, yes, but what they really tried to destroy was a message. That we Africans must know our place, that to dream is to endanger ourselves, that to speak is to become a target. He paused. "But I'm still here. And if this happened to me, it has already happened to thousands who can't afford lawyers, who can't make international calls, who won't trend on Twitter." The room fell quiet, the kind of quiet that speaks louder than applause. They all understood, because they'd lived it. Different faces, same war. A leader from Guinea leaned forward. "What they did to you, they've tried to do to all of us, with banks, with judges, with media silence." A woman from Mali added, "They fear unity. They fear a continent that remembers." Peter listened, then spoke again. "In Lagos, there's an empty plot now, just broken bricks, twisted iron, a place where people once worked, where we built dreams." He looked down. But sometimes, ashes are not just the end, they're the spark. That day they didn't sign treaties, they didn't pose for photos, but something happened. They saw each other, not as isolated voices, but as parts of a larger fire. They weren't asking for help from the West, they weren't waiting for permission, they were planning, because if you strike one, you stir the rest. And slowly, from the rubble of one building in Lagos, a movement began to rise, not in newspapers, not on TV, but in hearts, and conversations, and memory. Let the world think we are weak, Peter said as he left, until they realize we are just getting ready. Back in Lagos, the air was heavier, not from rain, but from revelation. Peter Obi sat in a small law office surrounded by papers, documents, court files, names that didn't exist. Across from him sat two legal experts, one young and sharp-eyed, the other Mrs. E's seasoned, steady, battle-worn. On the table, the court judgment, still smelling of ink, still reeking of deception. Mrs. E's shook her head as she read it again. "This doesn't make sense," she said. "This case, it should not even exist." She pointed to the petitioner. "The entity that filed this has no legal registration, no address, no official name. A ghost, on paper." Peter leaned in, but the judge accepted it. "Yes," she said, "an acting judge, with ties to high political offices." The young lawyer added quietly, "It was filed on a Thursday. Judgment was given by Friday afternoon. Demolition began Saturday morning." Peter stared. "That's impossible." Mrs. E's nodded. "In Nigeria, land cases take years. This one moved in hours." The room went silent, not from confusion, but from clarity, because now they knew. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't even corruption. It was choreography, a perfectly executed performance of injustice. Peter stood, walked to the window. "It was never about the law," he whispered. "It was about erasing something they couldn't touch directly, a symbol, an idea, me." He turned back. "They didn't destroy a building. They tried to destroy belief." At the edge of the city, another discovery was made. The two young investigators had gone further, digging where journalists wouldn't, asking where others were afraid. They found the original demolition contractor, not in his office, but drinking in a roadside stall. He was tired, didn't want trouble, but when asked who hired him, he laughed. They paid in cash, no name, no contract, just instructions: demolish that building, no questions. One of the young men asked, "Did they say who sent them?" The man didn't answer, just looked away, but silence again was louder than confession. A few days later, Peter received a brown envelope. No name, no return address. Inside, a copy of the original court filing, a list of names, one highlighted, a judge, recently promoted, connected to a senator, close ally of President Tinubu. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was smoke, thick, black, suffocating. "They want to bury me in procedures," Peter told Mrs. E's. "Delay the case, cloud the facts, blame a mistake and move on." She nodded. "That's how it's always done. The law is not broken, Peter. It's functioning exactly how they built it, to protect themselves and punish those who challenge it." Peter looked down at the rubble again. Now fenced off, no repair crews, no rebuilding, just dust and memory and something else. Determination. He held a press briefing, small, local journalists only. "I want to speak not just about a building, but about a system." He paused. "They filed a case against unknown persons. They delivered it to no one. They ruled it with no hearing. They enforced it with no shame. And if this can happen to me, then what about the woman selling groundnuts outside that court? What about the young graduate with no connections? What about you?" He held up the fake court order. "This is the face of modern oppression, not in uniforms, not in coups, but in documents, in briefcases, in silence." And that's when the mood shifted. People started whispering again, but this time, Not in fear, in anger, in recognition. "He's right," one market woman told a reporter. "My cousin lost his kiosk to state redevelopment. No notice, no payment, nothing." A taxi driver posted online, "They did this to my uncle in 2020, but he had no one to speak for him." Hashtags appeared, memes, old photos, stories. Suddenly, Peter Obi's building was no longer just his. It became everyone's loss, everyone's warning, everyone's fire. And that Peter knew was the mistake they made. They thought tearing down bricks would tear down belief. But belief is not stored in concrete, it lives in memory, and memory doesn't die. So he made a promise, not to rebuild the office, but to rebuild the fight. "We're not asking for pity," he said. "We're asking for justice, not revenge, not chaos, just justice. Because if they can destroy your future with fake signatures and silent courts, then the fight isn't in the streets, it's in the laws, in the language, in the light we shine on the shadows." And then he turned to the camera. "This is not just about me. This is about Nigeria, and the choice we must all make. Do we keep quiet, because it's safer, or do we speak, because the silence is already killing us?" The bulldozers were gone, the trucks had vanished, but the silence still lingered. In Lagos, the lot where Peter Obi's brother's company once stood lay bare. Twisted iron, burnt files, ashes. But ashes, as they say in Africa, are never just the end. Sometimes they're what the next generation plants seeds in. Peter stood quietly at the edge. No cameras, no entourage, just memory and resolve. He had walked through the courts. He had faced the system. And he had found what many feared to admit: the system was never broken. It was designed to work this way. For them, not for us. But even so, he did not run. Because some men are not made to escape storms. They are made to walk through them so others won't have to. He remembered the voices, the judge who never asked questions, the driver who was told, "Don't ask where the money's from," the shopkeeper who whispered, "These are Tinubu's boys," the fruit seller who simply said, "They didn't even give them time," and Ibrahim Traoré, whose voice echoed still, "When they strike one of us, the fire spreads." Peter didn't need a revolution of blood. He needed a revolution of truth. So he chose to speak, calmly, firmly. This isn't just about property, it's about principle. And no matter how high they build their palaces, if they are built on fear, they will fall. To the young across Africa, to the mothers who teach in broken schools, to the fathers who watch their children leave because there's nothing here. Peter had one message: we are not poor, we have been looted, we are not voiceless, we have been silenced, but now we speak. So let this story not end with a building destroyed. Let it begin with a question rebuilt. What kind of Africa do we want to leave behind? One where court orders come for unknown persons, or one where justice wears a name, a face, and a soul? One where silence keeps you safe, or one where truth sets you free? Because memory, my brothers and sisters, is louder than lies. And from memory, revolutions are born. If this story moved something in you, say it out loud. Write it below. Stand with those who are building truth from ruins. Comment "New Africa" if you believe we deserve better. And remember, this wasn't just Peter's story, it's ours, all of us. Every time we choose courage over comfort, truth over fear, subscribe. Not just for the story, but for the dream, a free Africa, a fearless one, extended chapter. The Echo Beyond Lagos. News of the illegal demolition of Peter Obi's family business in Lagos seemed buried under the red dust of the city. But a quiet truth was spreading not through mainstream broadcasts, but through market whispers, anonymous posts and stories passed between truck drivers and university students. It wasn't on the front page, but it was burning quietly in the hearts of the people. At a small bar in Enugu, hundreds of miles from Lagos, a group of law students sat around a worn wooden table under a flickering yellow light. They didn't know Peter Obi personally had never met his family, but they felt a shared pain. They flattened a legal business with just a fake paper. Ameka, a final-year student, asked again, "If that can happen to him, what are we?" A girl in the group, a Daisy, quietly pulled out a photo. It showed her mother's small kiosk, recently destroyed under the guise of urban renewal. No notice, no compensation. Her mother had simply cried when a bulldozer pushed over the family shrine still standing in the corner. "I don't know what law means anymore," she whispered. Then another in the group said softly, "But Peter didn't back down. Neither should we." Across Nigeria, similar stories were resurfacing. A mechanic in Kaduna shared an image of his garage torn down for traffic reorganization. A nurse in Benin City recounted how their community clinic was shut due to not meeting modern standards. Peter Obi's story became a symbol for everyone who had ever been swallowed by the system's silence. No one expected the ripple to cross beyond Nigeria's borders. In Ghana, a local radio station invited a young analyst, Kwame Mensah, to speak on regional political tensions. He pointed at the projected image of Peter Obi's destroyed building and said, "This isn't just about injustice in Nigeria. It's a regional pattern when independent voices are silenced, when ownership is erased by shadows and power. But they made a mistake. This story has crossed borders." In Senegal, a painter unveiled a portrait of Peter Obi, standing amidst ruins, holding a forged court order, labeled "Unknown Persons." Behind him, shadowy figures were rising. The painting, titled "The Ashes Remember," went viral across social media. Young people across West Africa began calling it the Obi moment, a moment of awakening. Meanwhile, in Abuja, the administration grew uneasy. They hadn't expected this momentum. Tinubu called a closed-door meeting with media and intelligence aides. One advisor said, "It seems we've made him a hero, not us," another corrected. The truth did. As for Peter, he didn't go on television. He made no grand speeches. He simply met quietly with other victims in corners, far from cameras. In a small village in Ogun, he sat beside an old woman who had just lost her home. She didn't recognize him until someone pointed, "Mama, that's Peter Obi." She looked at him and said simply, "If they robbed you too, then you're my son." In those days, he began receiving handwritten letters from students, shopkeepers, roadside vendors, each sharing stories of quiet losses. One letter read, "I don't know the law, sir, but I know what's wrong. And what happened to you, to my cousin, to my father, that's wrong." A 12-year-old boy from Kano sent a photo of himself standing in front of a wall that read, "Silence is their weapon. Memory is ours." Peter pinned that photo to his office wall. At the African Union, young delegates began raising concerns about the quiet political interference in judicial systems. At a development summit in Kigali, a researcher from Burkina Faso presented a paper titled "Peter Obi and the Manufactured Court, a Warning Sign for the Continent." Traoré sent Peter a private message. "Your story has left Nigeria. It's not yours alone anymore. It belongs to all of us, and they can't erase what's been engraved in the people's conscience." One evening, Peter returned to the demolition site. No entourage, no notice, but he found a small group of youths erecting a wooden sign. On it, in white paint, they had written, "On this soil they tried to bury us, but they forgot we are seeds." Peter didn't speak. He simply bowed his head. And he knew then that the fight wasn't over, but this time he wasn't carrying it alone. Extended segment, The Quiet Panic in Abuja. Behind closed doors in Abuja, not the halls of Parliament, but the rooms where real power doesn't need a nameplate, a new kind of fear was spreading. Not fear of protests, not fear of a coup, but fear of something they couldn't control: a story. A media aide rushed into the office of a senior advisor close to President Tinubu. In his hand was a folder of printed online content illustrations of Peter Obi student essays, podcasts from Ghana, tweets from Senegal to Tanzania, all carrying the same message: if they can erase Peter, they can erase us. The advisor said nothing. He set the folder down, lit a cigar, and stared out the window. "I thought we taught the people to fear," he muttered. "Turns out, we only taught them to remember." Elsewhere in a Ministry of Justice corridor, a young official sat in front of a screen reviewing files related to the Obi property demolition. He wasn't a Peter supporter, he wasn't opposition, but he understood the law, and he knew this so-called legal process was a performance brazen and brutal. No address for the claimant, no court hearing, no proof of notice served, he noted. But a judge signed it, one who got promoted 2 weeks later. He exhaled deeply and shut the laptop. Justice isn't dead, he thought. It's been sold. Meanwhile, inside a foreign embassy in Lagos, an internal report was rushed back to headquarters. The first line read, "The Peter Obi incident may escalate into a regional narrative of post-colonial suppression if not addressed carefully." The author warned that the Nigerian government's silence was no longer effective. Ibrahim Traoré's open call of solidarity with Peter had created a moral axis among young African leaders, those not bound by old systems, no longer afraid to confront economic or political empires. This is no longer a domestic dispute, the report stated. It is becoming a test of who owns Africa's narrative. In Lagos, Peter no longer appeared in public, yet he had become a quiet symbol. Students started naming unofficial study groups after him. Someone spray-painted under Echo Bridge unknown. Persons destroyed our building, but not our will. An underground rap group released a song titled "Demolished But Alive," a track about justice, memory, and the right to exist. The authorities seemed to realize arresting Peter now wouldn't silence him, it would turn him into a legend. And that's what they feared most. In Mali, at a private gathering of young political organizers, a woman stood to speak. "We need to closely watch what's happening in Nigeria. Peter Obi's case is a micro-version of what's being engineered across Africa to suffocate us with papers, courts, banks, and media silence. No blood, but orchestrated forgetting." A young man asked, "So what do we do?" She looked him straight in the eyes. "We record it. We retell it. We make sure they never erase another name." 1 week later in Abuja, during a press briefing on urban infrastructure, a young journalist raised her hand unexpectedly. "Minister, can you confirm who authorized the demolition of Peter Obi's brother's business, and why no media were allowed on site that day?" The room froze. The minister forced a smile. "We don't comment on individual cases," he said. "But if there were procedural errors, we'll look into it." The journalist sat down, but that thin, forced smile was caught on camera and spread like wildfire. Meanwhile, Peter Obi, without standing behind microphones, continued to be invoked as a question left unanswered. Not because he was a hero, but because he reflected the people themselves, a man who knew he couldn't win with weapons, but still refused to lose in silence. Final chapter. From Rubble, a Rhythm. Long after the dust settled in Lagos and the hashtags faded like night tides, something else quieter began to rise, a rhythm, not a drumbeat of revolt, but the steady pulse of memory of truth passed from person to person. Small stories, quietly shared, became something no government could stop awareness. Peter Obi was no longer at the center of the outrage, but rather a seed buried in the ground. He didn't call for marches, he didn't urge rebellion, he simply kept walking, meeting people, listening, writing, witnessing. In Kano, a retired teacher sent him a handwritten letter. "I never studied law, Mr. Obi, but I taught children for 35 years, and I know this: when students begin to ask why courts issue rulings with no one in the courtroom, we are planting a new kind of hope." At a quiet gathering in Accra, a group of African thinkers discussed what they now called the Peter syndrome, the phenomenon where an attempt to bury a truth makes it burn brighter. They didn't praise Peter as a saint. They analyzed him as a symbol of peaceful defiance, of someone who refused to be erased. A young scholar summed it up: "If tomorrow another building is destroyed, another voice silenced, then the question will no longer be who did it, but what will we do next?" In the public's mind, the story was no longer about demolition. No longer about a fake court order. No longer just about Peter Obi. It was about every person who'd ever been erased. A woman in Makurdi recalled her husband losing his job for challenging a land grab. A teenager in Sokoto made a TikTok video about his grandfather's farm stolen for a national project, and they connected with memory. With the question, does silence protect anyone anymore? Peter still lived in Nigeria. He didn't leave. He didn't seek asylum. He often walked past the dusty road where his family's company once stood, not to mourn, but to prove he hadn't disappeared. Some asked him, "Why don't you sue? Why not run for office again?" He smiled quietly. "I don't need a seat. I need dignity to have a place." Then one day, unexpectedly, a small news story emerged from Burkina Faso. A small town unveiled a memorial called the Office of Memory, a space dedicated to businesses destroyed by corruption. At the base of the monument, carved in 3 languages, were the words, "They erased the building, but not the belief." Days later, another town in Niger planted the Garden of Silence, where citizens grew trees in place of shops stolen from them. Each tree bore a name: my mother's kiosk, Uncle T's garage, the bookstore of a man without a name. Peter Obi visited these places quietly. No speeches, no cameras. He simply stood in silence, because he knew something had shifted, not in the streets, not on the news, but in how people understood themselves. They were no longer just victims. They were keepers of memory, planters of seeds, rebuilders. And then one calm afternoon, in a small classroom in Benue, a child asked, "Miss, if someone comes tomorrow to tear down our school, what should we do?" The teacher, once a silent one, replied, "First, don't forget. Then tell the story. Then learn everything you can, so one day you'll know how to stop it from happening again." Peter Obi's story ended this way. No explosions, no coups, no headlines. Just silence replaced by memory. Memory turned into action, and action becoming a seed. So that, from a bare lot in Lagos, a continent began to remember itself.